There's this enduring popularity with this genre. There's vampire fiction has been popular for hundreds of years. And I think vampire stories tap into our deepest fears. But I think the appeal really comes from the fact that they also play on our fantasies. A good vampire story to start with for avid fans of vampires would be a short story titled The Vampire. And it's interesting because it's arguably the first work of vampire literature, and it set the blueprint for many tropes in the genre. It was by John Polidori, and he depicts the vampire Lord Ruthven not as a bloated monster, which is how they appear in European folklore, but as a glamorous Gothic villain, at once attractive and repulsive, who fascinates his victims. And it's also a really interesting story because of how it came to be written. It was a product of the same ghost story contest that prompted Mary Shelley to write her famous Gothic novel Frankenstein. And another literary vampire work I recommend is the Victorian Gothic novel Carmilla. And it's also interesting to the development of vampire fiction because it's the first vampire novel featuring a female vampire, in fact, a lesbian vampire. The titular Carmilla is the vampire who preys on the innocent protagonist and narrator Laura. It helped to popularize many ideas that we now associate with vampires, like vampires must be invited to cross the threshold and they're baffled by crucifixes. So it's just a really wonderful read. And Carmilla is also a really fascinating window onto attitudes about women in the 19th century and the way that women had to repress their appetites and their desires to conform to notions of feminine purity. I also love vampire works that are kind of cross-generic and fuse, in particular, science fiction and Gothic horror. So I'm thinking of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, and it's a post-apocalyptic narrative that draws on both zombie and vampire lore. And another sci-fi Gothic hybrid I really love is Octavia Butler's Fledgling. And in both I Am Legend and Fledgling, we have a scientific or biological explanation for vampirism. So vampirism is a biological condition. It's not supernatural. There's so many small and big screen vampire stories, but the one I would just sneak in would be an early silent vampire film, Nosferatu, or Symphony of Horrors by Murnau. And it's just so creepy. It's a very loose adaptation of Stoker's Dracula, and it has wonderful expressionistic sets, and it's so eerie and atmospheric. And Max Schreck, who plays the vampire Count Orlok, gives a really iconic portrayal, and I think he's my favorite screen vampire.